It was a creed written into the founding documents that declared the destiny of a nation. Yes, we can. It was whispered by slaves and abolitionists as they blazed the trail toward freedom. Yes, we can. Yes, we can.
It was sung
by immigrants as they struck out the distant shores, pioneers who pushed westward against the unforgiving wilderness.
From the Boston Red Network and beaming on W episode, Kamala Harris for the People. Kamala Harris, candidate for president in the Democratic sweepstakes, has suspended her campaign. We'll go to the words of Kamala Harris on the Medium. I'm suspending my campaign today, 11 months at the launch of our campaign in Oakland. I told you all I'm not perfect, but I will always speak with decency, moral clarity, and treat all people with respect. I will lead with integrity, and I will speak the truth. That's what I tried to do every day of this campaign. So here's the truth today. I've taken stock and looked at this from every angle, and over the last few days have come to one of the hardest decisions in my life. My campaign for president simply does not have the financial resources we need to continue. I'm not a billionaire. I can't fund my own campaign. And as the campaign has gone on, it's become harder and harder to raise money we need to compete. In good faith, I can tell you, my supporters and volunteers, that I have a path if I don't believe it. So, to you, my supporters, it's with deep regret, but also with deep gratitude that I'm suspending my campaign today. But I want to be clear with you. I am still very much in this fight, and I will keep fighting every day for this campaign, for what this campaign has been about: justice for the people and all people. Our campaign has been about fighting for peoples whose voices have been not heard or too often ignored. We will keep up that fight. Let's remember that we are the first to put injustice of inadequate teacher pay on the national agenda. We will keep up that fight. We were the first to demand justice for our children, declaring that we would take bold executive action to stop gun violence. We will keep up that fight. We were the first to demand justice for women with a plan to block unconstitutional state abortion laws. We will keep up that fight. Our campaign uniquely spoke to the experience of black women and people of color and their importance to the success and the future of this party. Our campaign demands no one should be taken for granted by any political party. We will keep up that fight because no one should be made to fight alone. I believe our campaign showed every child in America, regardless of their color or gender, that there is no limit to who can lead and hold positions of power in our country. In that way, this campaign has been so much bigger than me. I'm extremely grateful to the hundreds of staff who moved and uprooted their lives, sacrificed their time for their families. I know our fight has been personal for each of them. And of course, I could not have done this without my husband Doug and my entire family and friends who gave up so much time to embark on this journey with me and have supported me every step of the way. I'm grateful to the thousands of volunteers, contributors who chipped in, who knocked doors, who made calls, who put their faith and trust in me. It has been the honor of my life to be your candidate. And I want to be clear, though I'm no longer running for president, I will do everything in my power to defeat Donald Trump and fight for the future of our country and the best of who we are. I know you will too, so let's do that together. Let's keep fighting for the America we believe in and the America free of injustice. An America that we know we can be unburdened by what we have been. Thank you, Kamala. That was Kamala Harris ending her campaign, an unfortunate situation. And let's go to the way we'll do this. This was from the Medium. We'll go to the Washington Post, and then we'll return to the LA Times. And this is by Eugene Scott. Kamala Harris couldn't get traction with the demographics she needed most, is what Mr. Scott has to say. He's writing, of course, in the Washington Post on the 3rd of December. Senator Kamala Harris ended her bid for the White House, unable to rally significant support from voting blocs. Her campaign and many political watchers thought would play a major role in sending her to the Oval Office. African American voters and women. The California Democrats campaign was launched with historic symbolism from its earliest moments. The first African American woman elected to the Senate from California announced her pursuit of the Oval Office on the birthday of a civil rights icon, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. She regularly paid homage to the late Congresswoman Shirley Chisholm of New York, the first African American woman to seek a major party presidential nomination during her campaign. What the biracial lawmaker with an unfamiliar name, who some believe was best suited to carry on Obama's legacy, was never able to persuade large swaths of those who backed the former president to support her, despite having virtual breakout moments during the Senate's investigation of Russian interference in the 2016 presidential election. Harris remained largely unknown to many Americans before launching her campaign, even amongst the groups many people thought would propel her. Her campaign was a reminder that being well known in Washington and political circles is not the same as having national recognition. While some more established liberal candidates were working to convince voters they were best positioned to undo Trump's political decision, Harris was in many ways still introducing herself, and put the junior senator at a bit of a disadvantage, even with African American women. He called black women one of the Democratic Party's most influential voting blocs. Some of Trump's strongest criticism comes from African American women, a group that voted against the GOP at higher rates than most. But while many African American women long for representation at the highest levels of government, some question whether an African American woman can attract the broad support needed to defeat Trump. This concern, along with former VP Biden's long history with African American voters, is part of what sent Biden flying past Harris in the polls with African American voters shortly after launching his campaign. Moody Mills, a host of a radio show, AF, said last week that Biden, who enjoys widespread name recognition, is a safe bet with many African American voters. You have older African American voters who are definitely on his side because they look to see where European voters who voted for Donald Trump are going to go, she said on MSNBC. We understand what oppression and discrimination looks like on a regular basis, and we understand a lethal threat to our way of life. And so we are to go the way it seems the safest. There were also questions about Harris among some groups she sought to win. Her history as a prosecutor and her role in of advocating for tough sentences for people of color forced her to answer questions that voters look for a candidate committed to criminal justice reform. And some African Americans questioned whether a daughter of a Jamaican immigrant raised by an Indian woman would respond to the issues affecting African America, calling on the U.S. to re-examine the ongoing impact of slavery on racial gaps. In her announcement ending her campaign, Harris pointed towards fundraising being the biggest obstacle that kept her from moving forward. My campaign for president simply does not have the financial resources to continue. She noted she was unable to self-fund, like many of the billionaires. With Harris' exit, the stage for the December Democratic debate consists of European candidates and older candidates during a time when the left constituency is younger and more ethnically diverse. Despite this shift, long-standing perception of leadership remain among some voters. Kimberly Peeler Allen, co-founder of Higher Heights, a political action committee that helps African American women get elected to office, previously told The Fix that African American women seeking office often have a harder time than white men in getting people to get behind their campaign. No doubt about that. I think a lot of this has to do with our perception of what leadership looks like. For umpteen years, the majority of elected leaders have been European and male, she said. You come with a counter that with a woman and a woman of color and an African American woman at that seeking the highest office in the land, it's something out of the norm. Regular frustration with conversation about electability led Harris defenders to argue that she was a candidate most prepared to defeat Trump. But for those who were hoping Harris would break the glass ceiling that the 2016 nominee Hillary Clinton could not do, 2020 was simply not Harris's time. Sounds in political and in politics and timing is often something. Anyway, that is his take on Kamala Harris, and a number of things here I perhaps will add. Kamala Harris, it is correct, was the daughter of a immigrant from Jamaica that had effectively little impact on her childhood. He and her mother separated and later divorced. She was an academic, a researcher there, taught at McGill University in Canada. But before she was able to do that, she was at the historic African American University, Howard, in Washington, D.C. And Kamala Harris herself is a graduate of Howard University, and of course the University of California's law school, I believe. Hopefully not Stanford. But anyway, nonetheless, that is an influence. She's in one of the historic African American sororities. So she does have a bond with African Americans and African American women in particular. Her time at Howard and her mother's being a professor there had an impact on her life, no doubt. Now, there was the California experience. She was the DA up in Northern California in San Francisco, and she later became the Attorney General of California. Now, in that campaign, her handlers, strategists, etc., accented more of the Indian heritage than the African American heritage. It's sort of like what happened with Tiger Woods. Tiger Woods was a multi-ethnic person, a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and ended up being African American in the end. His father was an African American that was part Aboriginal, but yet he went on, and obviously Tiger was a little bit different. His mother was Thai, so again, he was a combination of many, many things. African American, Aboriginal or Native American, Thai, growing up in California, etc. Tiger Woods. But Kamala Harris was not a Tiger Woods. Now, this is from the Los Angeles Times, another look at Kamala Harris and where Kamala Harris stood in the background, so to speak. Kamala Harris should have never run for president is the title of this particular article. This is by George Skeleton, the Capital Journalist columnist in Sacramento, California. The California Senator Kamala Harris should never have run for president in the first place. Her ambition far exceeded her ability. She hadn't yet established herself in the Senate, hadn't exactly excelled in her previous job as California's Attorney General. There wasn't much of a record worth bragging about on the campaign trail. Well, if you look at the little mayor, Mayor Petey from South Bend, he's mayor of a small town. In the scheme of things, he won the election by a little over 8,000 votes. And he has very little to talk about, period. Is minuscule. So when you take his breakout moment, he didn't have very many of those. He was an opportunist, enlisted in the military, in the Navy to be exact, was an intelligence officer in the Naval Reserve, spent some time in Afghanistan, but primarily he was a consultant with the consulting agency is there, and he was a media intern with this woman from Chicago that used to work for, I believe, CBS at one time, and she was on the air in Chicago in the 80s when I was there for the Harold Washington campaign, and Renee Ferguson, I remember her name, but being also the man from Deloitte as a business consultant. Now, the people that took on Mayor Petey's campaign, helped him promote it, is none other than Zuckerberg of Facebook. We did an episode on that here at WBRN called The Man from Facebook. Now, Kamala Harris was not the woman from Facebook, but she was definitely heavily engaged and heavily indebted to the political structure in California. And that was one of the big problems there. She went from single payer to a cursory visit to Medicare for all, back and forth once again. And in the campaign, it was an interesting situation. She put herself as a progressive, but as a California progressive. And at the end of this, we'll go back to that. After being in the Senate, elected to the Senate in 2016 cakewalk, she should have spent the next 3 years, focused exclusively on representing Californians in Congress and helping the state on such vital issues as development, in the environmental protection, health care, and homelessness. But she was in the minority in the Senate, and that's something he doesn't say. Most people around here, political advisors, her sister Harris, convinced the senators she should be a female Barack Obama, and be the first woman elected president. She wouldn't kick to be the Democrat who brought most presidential candidates fail, she was told, but the smart ones come out ahead of what they start. That's true in a few cases, but not in most. And in Harris's case, she rocked to the top of the candidates early. Yes, she did, with an opportunistic attack on Joe Biden about busing something he long discarded. And then she plummeted to the ground and discarded. What sort of impression will that leave? We'll find out. She would boost herself with Democrats by helping the party take back the Senate next year. No doubt she'll do that, stumping for candidates. My campaign for president simply doesn't have the financial resources to continue, she wrote. But Harris lacked money was just a symptom of her presidential bid, not in the root cause of his demise. Her downfall slide in the polls destroyed the confidence of potential campaign contributors in her ability to win. Drying up the money, plunging poll numbers resulted from her inability to connect with voters. And she couldn't connect with voters because of the core weakness of her candidacy, a lack of cohesive strategy and personal conviction. There was no evidence of the political soul needed to guide her towards public policy she felt strong about. She didn't exactly have a sense of who she was and what she believed and what she wanted to get done, said a disappointed Harris insider who asked for anonymity. And sooner or later, that stuff got exposed. Her strategic plan wasn't clear. The insider continues. The campaign was confident she would win the votes of African Americans in South Carolina and from fellow Californians. When that scenario didn't seem to be working out, Harris belatedly began focusing on the first contest in Iowa. The senator was falling there, failing. She was all over the map on health care and criminal justice. The insider said the San Francisco district attorney. She was a prosecutor or a public defender. It wouldn't have made much difference which role she decided, but she started bouncing around to be all things to all people. voters instinctively understood your heart's not in it. And anyone who watched Harris as an attorney general could have predicted this outcome. She refused to take positions on any state ballot proposition. Her excuse was that the attorney general writes the official ballot title and summaries. She didn't want to appear biased. But that was nonsense. She tried to avoid making political enemies, especially amongst law enforcement. Most unacceptable was her refusal to take a stand on two propositions to abolish the death penalty, a cause she claimed to have long supported. Measure narrowly lost. She also remained neutral on an initiative to expedite the death penalty. It passed, and she didn't take a position on the measure to reduce prison sentences, which passed. That was fatal. Yet Harris leaped into the presidential race, promising to be a fighter for the people. Clearly that message was geared from focus groups. The rhetoric didn't match the record. I'm going back and forth on Harris, initially a skeptic, then impressed, and back to skepticism. Another Harris problem was little known outside the political world is that employees reportedly found her difficult to work with. That created a lot of unhappiness, and it boiled over in recent weeks, creating an explosive front page story last week in the New York Times. A top Harris aide who jumped ship to another campaign left scorching resignation letter that was leaked to the Times. This is my third presidential campaign, and I've never seen an organization treat its staff so poorly. Staff, knife fighting in the New York Times, and political, your campaign is pretty much done. That's from Gil Durham, a former Harris staffer. That was pretty toxic. Durham, who was also press secretary, former Governor Jerry Brown, and Dianne Feinstein, is now an opinion writer for the McClatchy newspapers in California. A week before Thanksgiving, he wrote a column urging Harris to drop out. The hard truth, Harris was a weak presidential candidate, Durham wrote. Harris excelled in California politics because part of a home state Democratic cabal insider's machine, and that machine didn't work outside of California. The governor, Gavin Newsom, and Harris are tight political siblings, sharing the same campaign consultant, Ace Smith. Hell of a name for a campaign consultant. Like Newsom, will miss an opportunity to stump for Harris in Iowa. Nobody knows Newsom in Iowa. And plant seeds of his own presidential campaign in 4 or 8 years. And as for Harris's candidacy, to paraphrase Gertrude Stein, of all people, wrote about the senator's hometown of Oakland. There was no place there. There was no there. Anyway, unbelievable. Gertrude Stein definitely has a name with words, but Harris's campaign is much more complex than that. It is how she was defined by the corporate media hurt her, and she, being a prosecutor, was a child of the system by being that. Now, we'll contrast that to Amy Klobuchar. Amy Klobuchar made her political debut as a prosecutor there in the upper Midwest, but she was a child of the working class, and her father was a very successful journalist, wrote for the Minneapolis Tribune newspaper, and thus the name Klobuchar was a household name, whether they knew her or did not know her. But when you have name recognition, that's part of the ball game. And in the metro area, as a prosecutor that went about routine things, didn't rock the boat, didn't go up against the police, anything of that nature. However, she did prosecute a sitting member of the Court of Appeal there in Minnesota, a moderate type fellow that went amok and turned into a megalomaniac. She brought him down, and she remarked that in a different county, they had to take it in the case to a different county from her home county, that she saw some African American people, not very many in that county, walk into the courtroom, and she felt like she was home. Well, that's a little different situation, but smartly for her, she used that law and order so-called background to propel her into the Senate states. And she was able to languish there 2 terms, 12 years, before now her 3rd term, and into the presidential field. That's a different situation. Although she was not well known in the Senate, in fact, she was known as the senator of little things. But a sort of a built-in situation in that her state borders Iowa, and some of the same ethnic groups are in Iowa. She hasn't connected as much as she would want to, but in some polls she's almost up to the double digits, and she will be in the December debate. And she also borders Wisconsin, a swing state, very important there, and to a lesser extent. Well, that is a situation that can help her in the long game. And that's obviously what she has to be in, the same in Klobuchar, and do well in Iowa. Well, the situation in Iowa is for the so-called liberals, we'll call them, which is now neoliberals or whatever you want to call them. I wouldn't call her a neoliberal. We'll just leave with the liberal situation for her. That has some progressive types. She was 4th on our list. First on our list, obviously, is Bernie. And then it would have been Liz Warren, and then Beto O'Rourke, who is no longer there. And then it's Amy Klobuchar. Kamala Harris was not on the list there, nor was Senator Booker, because Senator Booker's unfortunate connections with Wall Street coming out of Jersey. He is a senior from Jersey, but has tried to frame himself as a more conscious of the party. Senator Booker doesn't like us. That really doesn't matter to me. I have no amicus towards Senator Booker of Jersey, other than his political opinions. I can recall when Willard Romney was relationship with Bain Capital was brought out. The then mayor of the urban ghetto of Newark called it nauseous. Well, it may be nauseous to him, and he's nauseous to us there, but he's unfortunately out of it. I recalled Lyndon John's father, how when his father was coming up, this was in Texas, that it was about ideas and ideology. But by the time Lyndon came around, that would have been under Roosevelt, it was about personal ambition. So that's what the problem is in this race. People being personally ambitious and not about their core ideology. And that's why we have so many of these people in, part of the reason. And then you also have a number of candidates put in there by big business sorts that are not very high in the polls and are able to continue on. We're not talking about Sayer. Sayer is a billionaire. He can continue forever. Later entry, Bloomberg, he can continue forever. In fact, he won't start until March, the Super Tuesday. And then you have the managing director of Bain Capital, the former governor of the Commonwealth, who is an African-American named Deval Patrick. Know where Deval Patrick is going right now. I guess he's read his papers in New Hampshire. So he does have name recognition in New Hampshire. But the field is very crowded. The polls go up and down between Bernie and Liz Warren in both New Hampshire and in Iowa. And then you have Biden, which evidently didn't take a major setback from the machinations of DJ Trump and his Ukrainian operation. So he's still moving along. And in some national polls, he's ahead by double digits or in the high single digits. These are national polls. And so he's holding on. In the race and at the House, spotlights moved to the Judiciary Committee. They had legal experts Saturday, 3 of them in favor of the impeachment, or speaking of it in historic terms there and legal terms. Then they had Mr. Turley from George Washington University that said he was not a Trump person, but he believed it was basically a waste of time. The issue was not there. But impeachment, the way it was written in the Constitution, high crimes and misdemeanors, could be stealing a ham sandwich or a spinning top or whatever. Could be high crimes, misdemeanors. It is open. We did a program on it. You will hear it. The basically the case Trump and the Ukrainian item there. It is set forward for people to listen at. And in fact, we have the report. We read it, all 300 pages of it. Some of it is in notes and some charts, references to emails, etc., that had been subpoenaed from the Verizon and AT&T text messages, etc. But it does lay out in detail the House Intelligence Committee's case. Now, it's at the Judiciary Committee. They will eventually end their testimony to the point that they will write articles of formal impeachment of D.J. Trump, and then the House will vote on it. And at the same time, the White House, under Cipollette, I think is his name, has convened meetings of Republican senators. They're starting to talk about who will be the witnesses on behalf of President Trump. So that is where that particular situation is going. So we'll have that program up, and we'll have program Kamala Harris for the People, where the race goes. And so to sum this up, Kamala Harris faced a number of name recognition coming from California and having to go into Iowa. That has not happened. I think the last senator that I can recall that ran for president out of California was Alan Cranston, and he had been an attorney general, but that was in a different time there, a different time period. Now, the last successful president out of California was, of course, Ronald Reagan. And Richard Nixon also, of course, he was a vice president, everybody knew who he was. It was a different situation there with Tricky Dick. But Reagan did come out of California, but that was and he was from the Midwest, actually. Talked to a fella out there that remembered Reagan. He was from Iowa, and Reagan used to broadcast various things, a sports broadcaster. In fact, I believe he even did some broadcasting for the Chicago Cubs. Nonetheless, that was a different situation, that he had been governor. And of course, now Reagan had been Borak's 20th, Borak's hour, and went around speaking for GE. So he had name recognition not only in the business community, 2018 Borak's, the Depp Valley days or whatever it was. He had name recognition. Kamala Harris did not. The 2006 campaign, with the fallout over Hillary Clinton, that really didn't mean as much, because Elizabeth Warren has been near the top of many, many polls coming out of the Commonwealth. But there was not much room. Kamala Harris could not be a progressive overnight, because she was not. She was an insider, as the fellow said. But how much did the color line play? Quite a bit, because again, the people that put her up there felt that she could have a breakout moment, but things had changed since Barack Obama ran out of Chicago. But he had a major address at the Democratic Convention, which Hillary Clinton just called a speech, and he had been at that time a senator from Illinois, which put him in a position, like Amy Klobuchar, to be coming from next door. And he was able to amass enough volunteers from Illinois and also from Minnesota to get him over the hump and win Iowa and get his name there. Of course, he lost in New Hampshire and also in Pennsylvania. But he was able to get to South Carolina and post second in Nevada, if I recall. I think Nevada at the time, no, not Nevada, excuse me. they had their caucus anyway. Was debated whether or not he won that was robbed in Nevada. But once again, a long slog, he was able to get the nomination there on a different set of rules. But the rules this time, and then we'll wind this up, in the Democratic Party, does favor candidates that are insiders still. That's how the party rules are written. Superdelegates have bitten the dust. Basically speaking, they don't have the influence. You don't get 500 plus delegates to start out like Hillary Clinton did. But at the same time, the nation itself has changed. And that is the problem that faced the Democratic Party. Those candidates have to look like the people. Not just because they point out, well, African Americans favor Joe Biden. Well, yes. But African Americans are only about 15% of the national voter turnout. Latinos have surpassed us. But it depends on which states you're talking about. In key states, Americans will, followers of O.J. Simpson, like Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, will decide which way they go. And in Michigan, and anyone that's been to a goat roping contest knows about that. So this race will continue. Now, the factor is, remember, these candidates all out here that have suspended campaigns to drop it out. Whom among them will be running for vice president? Who among the ones on the stage in later this month will be running for vice president? This is Boston Red in the Jerry Pippin broadcast booth. Good day, and we'll see you on Friday, Jobber. And remember, we do have the episode on the House impeachment panel. We review that, and we attach it for your reading pleasure. Good day.